To get started, you're going to need to have all your templates cut out, your two fabrics. In this case, I'm using this lighter fabric as my background and this darker one for the curve or half circle itself. You're going to need something to trace and mark your templates with. If you do have really dark fabrics, just make sure you have something that's going to make marks that are going to show up on your darker fabric. You'll need your rotary cutter to cut out your fabric. And I tend to instruct for the use of pins in my patterns because that is a preferred method by a lot of people. But I'm also going to show you guys how I use these little clips. So if you are maybe a little bit more pin averse like I am, this could be an approach that you can try out to see if it works for you. So let's get started. Okay, so I've got my fabric that I'm going to use for the half circle, the corresponding template piece, and my marking tool. Now this template says to mark on the right side of the fabric inside the curve. So in my case, I'm using a solid, and I don't pay much mind to what's right or wrong side of the fabric on solids. But if you were using a print, you would want to make sure that that fabric was face up, and then put the template on top of your fabric, right side up, and trace around the curve. And make sure you have marks that are dark enough that you can see when you're cutting. Now, for these kind of tick marks that are around the curve, I'm going to make some small marks just along the outside of where these are. And then that's going to allow me, because this does say to mark inside of the trace curve, to carry these over onto the inside of the traced curve. And I'm being pretty careful to not carry or make them too long, because you do want to make sure those marks stay within your seam allowance. So as long as your mark is shorter than 1/4 inch, you should be fine. And this is a water-soluble pen, so it shouldn't matter, but to be honest, you never know. So now I'm going to cut this out, and I'll show you what's next. Okay, so now I've got my half circle cut out, and I've discarded the rest, added it to my ever-growing scrap pile. And if you do need to touch up any of the marks along the curve, go ahead and do that now. And after you've done that, you can set that aside for right now. And now we'll go ahead and cut out the background. So, whichever side you're going to be cutting your curve out of, in this case, it's this side, you're gonna fold it in half this way, matching the edges, just to create a little, make sure you can see this, a center crease, so that when you unfold it, you've got some reference point to the center of your piece. Now I'm going to grab the corresponding template, and in this case it's template 1B, which says to mark on the wrong side of fabric outside of the curve. So again, I've got solid fabric, but if you had a print, you would want it face down, and you would put the the template on it like this, aligning it on the edge and making sure that center line is on that fold that you created. Now trace around this template like this, and similar to what we did for the other piece, just make little marks along where those notches are on the template. And because we're marking on the outside of the trace curve, you don't need to carry them into the inside, because the piece that you're wanting is this, and you're going to discard this part. So I will go ahead, make sure I have these marks so that I can see them, and now I will cut this out. All right, now I've got both my half circle and my background piece. And what we're going to do is now we're going to prep it to go to the sewing machine and sew these two curves together. So with the half circle right side up, lay that out, and then with your background wrong side up, or in other words, right sides together with your half circle piece, you're going to want to align these two center marks and pin. And now what you're going to do is find the edge, the corner of your background, align it to the corner of the half circle piece, and then pin where that mark is. Boop. And then there's one notch in between those, so you can line those up. Grab a pin and pin that. And then you're going to do the same with the other side. So find that inner corner of your background piece, bring it back around to the corner of the half circle, align those two marks up and pin there. And then finally align these two marks and pin there. Now I know I did promise to show you how I use those little clips too, so I'll do that once we get to the sewing machine. But a lot of people do prefer a lot more pins than this. Some people prefer less, some people prefer more. If you do want to be, or maybe if you're new to curves, or you just prefer to be really secure in your curve alignment, you can put pins, as many as you like, in between each of these. But these notch marks or tick marks give you a starting point to just make sure that everything is properly spaced out along the curves. So now let's take it to the sewing machine. All right, so now we're at the sewing machine, we're ready to sew our curve. So I've got my 1/4 inch foot on, which is super helpful in this case. And what I'm gonna do is, I've started right at the edge, and I'm gonna start sewing. And don't get into that bad habit of sewing over your pins. Take them out before you get to them. And as you go along the curve, ooh, I got close on that one. You're gonna want to sort of flare out this background piece, which you see is on top, just to make sure that it aligns with the half circle itself. And go as slow as you need to, just making sure that the curve is on hitting the outside of your 1/4 inch foot, if that's what you're using. And, you know, stop every few stitches and adjust as needed. And again, just go as slow as you need to. And you'll notice, you know, there's going to be these creases just because that's the nature of sewing curves. The important thing is that the fabric under your needle is flat, and all those creases will go away once we press it out. So no worries there. Okay, we'll take that pin out, and I'll show you guys how I use these clips instead. So I have this pin here. I'm going to take out the rest of these pins. And what I do is, I don't use any pins at all, but I just, at every next set of marks on my curves, I clip those together there. Make sure those are lined up. And then I just kind of manage it like that. I manage it from notch to notch. And so I will continue to see this curve. I go a little bit faster than maybe I should, but I've actually found that curves are more forgiving. I think especially bigger curves can be more forgiving than I think. And then once I get close to that clip, I take it out, make sure these are still aligned. And then I find the next set of notches or marks. Make sure you guys can see that. Line those up and clip. And then again, continue to sort of flare out that top background fabric and make sure none of those creases make their way under your needle. And sometimes I need to pull back the background fabric to make sure that the actual half circle hasn't sort of slid back. I'm continuing to go around and adjust. I'm going to hit that clip soon. Okay, now I'm going to find the last set of marks, which happen to be the last ones. Clip those together. And continue to sew. And you do sort of get some muscle memory of the curve depending on how many you're doing and the size. You kind of get a feel for how quickly the fabric should be turning on your machine. Okay, I'm close to there. Now I'm close to the edge. I'm going to try to make sure these corners stay lined up as I finish off this curve. There we go. Okay, I'm back at the cutting mat, and you'll see that I've already gone ahead and pressed my curve, and it turns out so much smoother than you think it's going to when you're sewing it. So I do normally press towards the outside of the curve, which I think produces a smoother curve overall. But in this case, because I do have a darker fabric as my half circle and such a contrasting lighter fabric for background, I've gone ahead and pressed my seam open, which is just going to help with preventing that darker seam allowance from showing through on, through the front. So when you are pressing, just keep in mind, if you come across any stubborn creases, go ahead and just pop it with some steam, or I've got a spray bottle that I use along with my iron to really go over any of those stubborn creases that you'll find as you're ironing out your curve. So now we will work on making the crescent. To make the crescent part, it's a little bit reverse from making just the half circle, because now the piece that you're going to sew into your quote-unquote background is going to be your actual background fabric, because you're creating that sort of inset part of the crescent. So I've got my corresponding template and my background fabric that is going to become the curve that I'm going to sew into the other sort of surrounding piece. So exactly how we traced and marked the template for the half circle. I'm going to trace this around, and it does say on the template here to mark on the right side of the fabric. So we've got that right side up. I've traced around the curve. Now I'm going to mark these little notches, and exactly the same way that I did it that first time, I'm going to carry these marks just a little bit inside the curve, since this is the piece that we're going to be sewing, and this will be discard. And now I'll cut that out. Okay, so I've got my curved piece. I've made sure I can see all the marks along the curve there. And now we'll work on cutting out from the half circle what's going to become what we'll call the background piece, right? That we're going to sew this part into. So I will grab the corresponding template for that. And again, similar to when we were sewing just the general half circle, when we were cutting out from the background, we marked on the wrong side of the fabric. So I'm going to turn this over. And to make sure that, you know, things can get a little bit wonky when you sew curves. So just to make sure that everything is lined up again, we will take this piece, match up the ends of the circle seams, and then just make a little crease right there so you know where to line up your template. So now you know that it's going to be centered on the half circle, and there's plenty of room for error in this, in the size of this block as a whole. So don't worry if, you know, the other pieces of your unit here are not lined up. Just make sure that you've got a center crease in the middle of your half circle that's sewn in here. All right, so, just like I said, you want to turn this wrong side up, right side down. So we're gonna line this on the edge, line up that center line with the crease we just created. And now I'm gonna mark, or I'm gonna trace this on here like that. And we're gonna want those notch marks now just on the outside, because we're gonna discard what's actually underneath the template right here. So we've got one there, one here, trying to keep them short so that they stay in that 1/4 inch seam allowance and don't show through. Okay, and now I'll cut this part out, discard this, and then we'll sew our crescent together. Okay, so now I've got my curve that I'm going to sew into this background piece. And again, same general concept that we did the first time around. I'm going to take this face up, so right side up, your kind of quote unquote background piece, right side down, wrong side up, and start by matching that center mark and pin. Now, unlike the first time around, before we, took the inner corner of this and matched it, not the case here. Just focus on matching these notches that are marked here. So these two end ones, I'll match those and I'll pin there. This one in between, I'll match those. I'll pin there. And then I'll do the same with the other side. And then we'll take this to the machine and sew these together. Okay, we're back at the machine and I've gone ahead and put my curve under the needle. I'm making sure those first notches line up. Now again, the edges or the ends of your curves and for this particular case with the crescent are not going to line up, but that's okay. So you'll just want to make sure that those first, now you've probably used pins. I'm using my, quick and dirty clip method. But in any case, you'll just want to make sure those first notches line up, and then you'll want to start sewing at least a few stitches before that. And then really the same principles, and this one is pretty easy because the curve is not as severe. It's a lot shallower curve, so you're not having to curve the fabric around at such a steep rate. But you'll want to do the same thing with your quote-unquote, in this case, background fabric on top, flaring it out to make sure that it aligns with that curve. I'm close to the clip there, so I'll take that out and move it to the next set of marks, which are right there. I'll clip. Okay, again, after I clip, I sort of flare this out and continue on my merry way. the next set of marks right there. Guys, I have no idea if anyone else uses that method. I just kind of made it up. If it works for you, let me know. If it doesn't, don't do it. Do whatever works for you. That's one thing I've learned. Okay, so we're going to continue to kind of smooth out these creases. Okay. And we are making our way to the final set of notches here. Okay. All right, we'll take that out. Yep, those still line up. That's great. Make sure to sew at least a few stitches beyond that last set of marks. And now we are done there. And again, can't emphasize this enough. These will not match up. You're going to have this overhang, which is totally fine. We're going to trim it off, so no worries there. All right, we'll get this ironed and then we'll trim it up. Okay, we are back at the cutting mat yet again, and we've got our crescent. I bet that was way easier than you thought it was, or I hope so. I did go ahead and press this out, and again, don't hesitate to just really go after any stubborn creases and go to town with steam, because I've got quite a bit of wiggle room and room for error. We will be trimming, you know, both the half circles and the crescents. So I got your back there. So do not stress if you've got some, you know, wonkiness at the end. Obviously, this is intended to overhang like this. We're going to cut that off. And I hope this was really helpful, and I hope you enjoy sewing your curves and your crescents.